Welcome back, everyone. Continuing our lecture 16 on disorders of the neuromuscular system, we're going to look at disorders of the modulators that we learned about, so the basal ganglia and the cerebellum. The first condition we're going to discuss is Parkinson's disease. This is a progressive neurodegenerative disease. So neuro meaning neurons and degenerative meaning they degenerate and die off. When I say that it's progressive, that means that it gets worse and worse over time, and then it is ultimately fatal. We're not really sure what causes this. There are certainly some genetic and environmental factors that seem to be at play, but this is a disease that causes death of neurons specifically in a part of the basal ganglia, which is called the substantia nigra. So I'm not making you learn the different parts, but just so you know, here it is. That is one of the parts of the basal ganglia. And that is where the neurons die in Parkinson's disease for whatever reason. So what are the symptoms that we see? So remember, the basal ganglia tend to, at baseline, tonically inhibit motor contraction, but they're also important in a lot of feedback loops and making sure that our movements are smooth and coordinated. So what's interesting about Parkinson's is what we see is something called bradykinesia. Now the prefix brady means slow, and kinetic means movement, right? So motion or movement. So they tend to move very slowly. They often have difficulty initiating movement, so kind of overcoming and turning off that tonic inhibition. They often have a resting tremor as well. So frequently it's one where their hand will kind of roll back and forth like this. Many things can cause tremors, but this is one of them. And then their muscles are often pretty rigid and stiff. And because of all of these difficulties, they often have what's called a shuffling gait. They can't move their legs very far. They don't have that nice, fluid, cyclic movement. They'll just kind of shuffle forward. So there are a couple of animations here. So this is someone with Parkinson's who's attempting to eat some cereal from a bowl, and you can see the tremor makes it really difficult. So this disease can have profound implications on people's ability to live their lives independently. And then this is an example that's not working. Oh dear. Oh, I'm sorry, that was an example of the shuffling gait. I'll find a video and post it in Canvas for you. Sorry about that. Huh. Okay. Who knows what else other ones aren't going to work. All right. So what do we do to treat Parkinson's? So the unfortunate truth is that we don't have any treatments currently that can stop the progression. So this is a progressive disease. It gets worse and worse and worse and is eventually fatal. We don't have any treatments that can stop that continuation, that can stop the death of the neurons. But we do have some treatments that can help with the symptoms. So interestingly, the neurons that this disease particularly causes the death of are neurons that release as their neurotransmitter dopamine. So medications that increase the amount of dopamine in the brain can actually help with these symptoms and help restore more normal motor function, and can also sometimes help decrease tremor and other things. They've also been experimenting with and having success with some deep brain stimulation, where they have a battery-powered device that they put inside your body, and there's a wire that goes up into your brain that then stimulates part of the basal ganglia to kind of do the job for you. That can also be very helpful. And then, of course, if you're having all of these motor symptoms, physical therapy is going to be really important. Occupational therapy is going to be really important, right? There are special types of spoons and things that you can use that will make it easier for you to eat and do activities of daily living despite your deficits. And then, of course, mental health and psychological support is going to be very important as well. Another disease that affects the basal ganglia that is also a progressive neurodegenerative disorder that is fatal is Huntington's disease. Now, this one we do know the cause. It's a genetic disorder. There's a genetic mutation that results in an abnormal protein, and it is inherited in an autosomal dominant fashion. So, if one of your parents has this disease, then there's a 50% chance that they pass that gene on to you and that you will have the disease as well. It doesn't start manifesting symptoms until later in life, usually. So when we think about kind of genetics and parenting and all those types of choices that people might make, usually people don't know they have Huntington's disease until they're later in life and they have already had children. So this affects the basal ganglia and some other parts of the brain as well. And kind of on the opposite spectrum from Parkinson's, instead of having difficulty with movement, we see abnormal movements, kind of involuntary movements. And that's often referred to as chorea, which comes from the Greek word for dance. So Huntington's dance or Huntington's chorea. So these abnormal movements, that's also the root of the word choreography, by the way. And Huntington's, because it can affect some other parts of the brain, also has cognitive and psychological symptoms. And again, this is a progressive neurodegenerative disorder that is ultimately fatal. So we're going to watch a clip that I hope will work. Yes, so this is an individual who has Huntington's disease, and they're attempting to just walk to the counter and grab their cup of coffee, and you can notice all these extraneous movements, right? So this is the chorea that is often seen in Huntington's disease. So it's kind of the opposite from Parkinson's. Instead of difficulty initiating movement, we have excessive movements. The last condition I want to talk about when we talk about disorders of modulators is problems with the cerebellum. Now, there are many potential causes of problems with the cerebellum. There are some genetic and inherited disorders. You can have a stroke to the cerebellum. You can have injuries to the cerebellum. One of the most common causes is chronic alcoholism, because that can lead to deficiencies in certain vitamins, which then ends up causing problems in the cerebellum. So this is a good time to remember what the cerebellum does. So remember, it's taking all that sensory information, visual, somatosensory, proprioceptive. It's got a copy of the motor plan. It's got a copy of what the motor neurons are actually doing. And it's taking all of this into account and then modifying our motor output so that we can actually accomplish the actions that we want to have. So really important for lots of things. So as you can imagine, if you're having problems with your cerebellum, you're going to have some significant deficits. One of the classic hallmarks of cerebellar degeneration symptoms is ataxia. The word ataxia means clumsy and uncoordinated movements. So if I am trying to point to something, so I'm trying to point to my other finger, so I'm trying to point to something, I have to keep in mind all this visual information, this proprioceptive information. There's lots of things that I have to do that my cerebellum is helping me to do. So somebody with ataxia, right, would have trouble actually doing those kind of coordinated movements. They similarly then will have a very unsteady gait, because again, that proprioceptive information, the checking the motor plan against what's actually happening, all of those things aren't functioning correctly. They can also have tremors and often trouble with speech and swallowing. We haven't talked in detail about those yet, but those require very finely coordinated muscular actions. Both of those do. We also talked, when we talked about the cerebellum previously, that it also plays a role in cognitive functions and regulation of emotions and learning. So people can also have trouble with the cerebellum, or with those aspects of cerebellar function as well. This is a GIF that is actually working of the ataxic or unsteady gait that we can see with someone who has cerebellar dysfunction. So almost as you watch them, you can almost see it's like they can't feel where their feet are, right? They can't actually feel the floor. They lose their balance easily. You may even be thinking, well, gosh, it looks like someone maybe who's had too much to drink. And certainly alcohol in the acute setting, when it is impairing your brain function, one of the places it acts is on the cerebellum. So that is an apt observation. So in summary, when we talk about disorders that affect these modulators of motor functions, we've got the basal ganglia disorders. We talked about Parkinson's, which is a progressive neurodegenerative disease of uncertain cause, but genetic and environmental factors are involved. People get bradykinesia, which is very slow movement or difficulty initiating movement, tremor, muscle rigidity, and a shuffling gait. They can also have cognitive and emotional symptoms as well. And because the neurons in the basal ganglia that are affected by Parkinson's are ones that release dopamine, medications that increase the amount of dopamine in the brain can be helpful in treating the symptoms of this condition. Huntington's disease is the other progressive neurodegenerative disorder. That one is genetic, inherited in an autosomal dominant fashion. And instead of causing decreased movements, that one, by impairing a different part of the basal ganglia, results in increased movement, and that chorea that we saw in a video of. And then finally, the cerebellar disorders, which have many potential causes, including chronic alcoholism, result in ataxia, those clumsy, uncoordinated movements, unsteady gait, and speech and swallowing difficulties. So that's it for disorders of the modulating systems for the motor system. And next time we'll look at pathways.